The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Wednesday the 27th of January 2016 opened up with gold at $1,120 an ounce, silver $14.48 an ounce, Texas crude $31.45 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 395 U.S. currency. Today in history, Thursday, January 27th, 1825, the U.S. Congress approves Indian Territory in what is present-day Oklahoma. This cleared the way for the forced relocation of Eastern Indians, known as the Trail of Tears. In recent news, the Vatican announced over the weekend that Pope Francis will be visiting Sweden later this year to mark the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's writing and posting of the 95 Theses on the front doors of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, Germany, October 31st, 1517. Amongst other points, Luther primarily wrote argumentations against the Roman Catholic theology of indulgences, essentially the selling of forgiveness from temporal punishment, from sins for money, a practice still upheld by the Church. On October 31st of this year, Francis is set to be at the southern Swedish city of Lund, where the Lutheran World Federation was founded in 1947. While his predecessors have visited Protestant churches, Francis has come under criticism from traditionalists and conservatives within the Church, who accuse him of sending conflicting signals about interfaith relations. Catholic traditionalists have accused Francis of making too many concessions to Lutherans, since both religions will be using Luther's Common Prayer during the 2017 Reformation commemoration services being held jointly between the two churches, which they say excessively praise Luther, who was historically condemned as a heretic and excommunicated. Pope Francis has made ecumenism one of the main themes of his papacy, considering he has already visited the Lutheran Church of Rome, the Waldensian Protestant community in northern Italy, Rome's Jewish synagogue, and is soon due to become the first pope to visit Rome's mosque later this year. Marvin Minsky, a pioneer in the field of artificial intelligence at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, died Sunday at the age of 88. Minsky viewed the brain as a machine whose function can be studied and replicated in a computer, and he considered how machines might be endowed with common sense or artificial intelligence. Daniela Rust, director of MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, said that Minsky helped create the vision of artificial intelligence as we know it today. This was your lowdown for January 27th, 2016.
Hey, all you schmohawks out there. You're listening to the Voice of Reason radio show here on the Logos Radio Networks. I'm your host, Ben Farmer. And with me, as always, from across the table, we've got Nick Reed, media coordinator for the Libertarian Party of Texas. Say hello, Nick Reed.
How's it going, you liberty lovers?
Well, you know, we are just doing the finest here. In the next segment, we're going to talk about a lot of things today. But number one that we're going to talk about today is regulations. And are government regulations benefiting the people, or are they benefiting the cronies? I highly suspect that when we dive into this subject, we'll see how cronies are able to use regulation to out-regulate their own competition. And, of course, we always think that free market is the best regulator of anything and that you can vote with your dollar. Isn't that a wonderful concept that you have an option? If you don't like a product or you don't like how a product gathers their equipment or creates their equipment, you don't have to buy them. And a lot of times what happens is government will step in and say, no, actually, you do have to buy this product. And that is taking away choice, taking away the freedom of choice from people, from the human beings, the humans that actually matter. Nick, we got a lot of stuff going on today. We're going to bring in Steve Basil. Steve Basil has been working on this issue that I kind of do want to get into right now because this is what's going on in Austin, Texas right now, is that the city council got together a few weeks back and said, we don't like how free this whole ride-sharing situation has gotten. Companies like Uber, companies like Lyft, they're just driving around, taking people left and right all over the city, and we don't like that. We want to put some regulations into that to try to control things. And this is what they say. They're trying to do it for safety. for safety.
That's for the children.
It's for the children. Exactly. If we don't protect the children, then 9/11 or something is kind of the way. Well, people in our community like Steve Basil, who is a bar owner, took a stand against this and said, no, we like these ride-sharing programs. I wanted to bring Steve in right now. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So Steve has lived in Austin since 1993. He's the chief marketing officer and managing partner of BD Riley's. I think probably all of us have been there. Nick, you've been there, right?
Absolutely.
I certainly hope so.
Fell asleep on the bar one night, maybe?
After dancing on it.
He's responsible for a whole lot of things, for Pub Twitter, Facebook, Yelp, and Google Places administration, as well as local web advertising and arts, charity, sponsorship, visibility. Steve, how did you get involved in this whole ride-sharing situation in Austin?
Like the best things, it was shared by a friend. Somebody said, you shouldn't wait for a cab. You should take Uber. And within a minute, because I have a smartphone in my pocket, I downloaded an app and saw a little car icon. I clicked on it and took an Uber ride, my first ever. And since then, I haven't ridden in a taxi in Austin and don't really expect to. It was interesting, technologically advanced. It was predictable. It was on time. It was cashless. I knew who was coming for me. I knew what their car looked like. I knew what the license plate was. And I had an email receipt as soon as it was done. I was instantly won over as a customer the first time I rode.
Yeah, I think all of us probably who have experienced these rideshare programs had the same experience, which is, wow, this is so much easier than calling a cab. I've got the picture of the guy who's going to come pick me up, a picture of the car he's driving that's coming to pick me up, and I can see more or less where they are on this map that I have. And, I just suspect that if a guy with a different face were to pull up, I would probably go, hey, no, I'm not getting in your car because you didn't show up. That's never happened to me before. I've taken hundreds of Uber rides and a dozen Lyft rides or so. It's never happened. So I wonder if the idea that it is safer to take a taxi, is there any credence in that?
Well, I kind of approached it after becoming an Uber customer. And by the way, I've ridden Lyft as well with great success. As a bar owner, I call cabs for my patrons fairly often. And the process goes like this. I need a cab for Ben at 204 East 6th Street, ready now. And they'll give me some sort of an estimate saying, 15 to 30 minutes. And then customer Ben has a choice of going out and waiting by the curb or waiting about 15 minutes, then going out and waiting by the curb. And in the meantime, anybody could have walked along on the street as a cab slows down and pulls up and gotten in that cab. So now I have an unhappy patron who isn't sure that I did call him a cab, or I have someone who makes another decision on how to get home when perhaps they shouldn't be driving. And that's only one example. The predictability and reliability is important to me, but I want to have as many safe transport options for my guests coming to the pub, where when parking is tough and downtown is congested, or going home from the pub when perhaps they've had a beer or two and they're not comfortable driving. And these transportation network companies make that very easy to do and make it very predictable for me to say, hey, you can get an Uber or a Lyft car on 7th or on Congress or on 5th when 6th Street is closed very easily and get home safely.
Yeah, I wonder if that is simply just something that we talk about all the time, which is that technology is sort of making government regulation replaceable. Whereas all throughout human history, humans did require a top-down approach telling people, okay, this is approved and this is not approved. But as technology advances, we are more and more able to kind of make those decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's, I'm a sample size of one, but clearly there are many people who have said the same thing. Once I rode an Uber car, I'm not calling a cab again. The biggest issue for me in Austin is the availability of taxis. When I need a cab, particularly at a peak period, leaving ACL Fest, leaving an event, trying to get to or from Eeyores, trying to leave downtown, when it's raining, when it's 2 a.m, the availability of cabs plummets. I moved here in 93. It seems to me we have the same number of cabs that we had back then.
Yeah.
They are just as unpredictable, just as unreliable, and just as difficult to find in peak periods. So, having lived in Manhattan, where cabs are omnipresent, it was easy to hail a cab anytime, day or night. And, by the way, there were transport options beyond that in the form of the subway system.
Sure.
Here, without any other transport options, safe transport options to and from downtown, the answer is either put more cars on the road or allow people to vote with their dollars, as they have in the last year and a half, as Uber and Lyft have succeeded, I think, even beyond their expectations when they first moved to Austin.
Right, and I would say, as somebody who works on 6th Street, my office is on 6th Street, please do not put more cars on the road. For God's sake, the city is so crowded right now. And if you're not listening in Austin, don't move here because it sucks here. It's awful.
It's the two-edged sword. We love our city, but we hope nobody else moves here.
Right. And of course, on a day like today, which it's absolutely gorgeous outside, I should say the date. It's January 30th, 2016, and it's 75 degrees. It's absolutely spectacular outside.
It's winter in Austin.
And don't move here. Stop moving here because it's crowded. But you're right. There really is only two options to handling that, which is more crowding or allow people to vote with their dollar.
Well, I think we saw an interesting experiment over the past year and a half as Uber and Lyft were allowed to operate and get the business they earned. And also attracted the drivers who wanted to work for them. And I have friends and employees who have signed up with Uber and Lyft. A bartender who gets off duty at midnight and is wide awake and sober is a perfect downtown driver. Our bartenders have now got an opportunity with Uber or Lyft to pick up a fare or two on the way home, make a little extra money, and give someone a safe, reliable ride home. The job benefit for the casual employee, and these I'm talking about art workers, music industry workers, bartenders, service industry employees, people who work part-time and could use a little bit of extra money, as most people could. Uber and Lyft represent an opportunity to do just that using something that you have, a driver's license and a vehicle. And the last year and a half has been great. It's been wonderful to drive home at 1 a.m. and not see a gauntlet of people waving cash and jumping into the street, desperately trying to stop a taxi because there's so few of them available. It really has changed the way downtown looks in the evening hours. And I have to say, after the festival, Eeyores last year, after the ACL Fest this fall, a dramatically different scenario than a small number of people waiting for a very, very small number of cabs in a very peak period.
Yeah, and I will say in the industry that I'm in I do corporate events. So almost anything that my company is doing is going to be one of these large events where there's no parking available. And I have technicians who are working on this event who need to go to the event and perhaps park over all day. And it's just impossible. So these guys take an Uber. They get dropped off. They're there on time, by the way. They work all day, and then they take an Uber home. It's just been dramatically good. I will also mention that I have had friends in the last year who lost their jobs suddenly. And they don't panic. The old way of just, oh, my gosh, I have no idea what I'm going to do. They go, you know what, I'll Uber or Lyft until I find another job. And it typically is enough to get by through those times. So I just see this technology as dramatically improving the way of our lives in larger cities. Probably smaller cities are, they're probably not as affected by this. Although I don't know. That could be the case. If you're out in Abilene, Texas or something, I would imagine the cab companies are probably pretty unreliable there. So I don't know. I know in the big cities, it has made a vast difference. And Nick, you've been walking around gathering signatures for this. Can you tell us about that experience?
That's right. Actually, we even had taxi cab drivers who signed the petitions themselves.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was really interesting because you get the impression, kind of like people abroad get this idea about America, and they believe that everybody in America has the same views and supports the things that people in D.C. are doing. It was really interesting to see that even the taxi cab drivers themselves were in support of the free market, and it seems like there's something else that's the issue here than that there's this all-around taxi rivalry going on between Uber and Lyft and the taxi cab drivers. I don't think so. I mean, in fact, a lot of them even mentioned to me that, they're in favor of the free market. And if that's what the people want, then, they didn't really have a problem with it. And they showed up to support. One of the things that I did realize when I was going around petitioning is that it seems like the policy positions of our council members were not really representative of the people who voted them into office within their precincts. It really seemed like the people we had 65,000 signatures, and we could have kept going, but that's just what you can gather with a few people in a few weeks. You only need 20,000. It seemed like there's something else at issue because the people have spoken with 65,000 signatures, and it should have been enough already that when you have the public demand for Uber and Lyft to the extent that we have here, that there is a preference, obviously, for a service with less regulation.
And that is exactly what we're going to get into after this break. Is the city council actually representing the people who voted them into the office, or are they representing a private interest who may have thrown a bunch of money their direction? You're listening to the Voice of Reason podcast on the Logos Radio Networks. We'll hit you in a second.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
Whoa, amber is the color of your energy. Whoa, shades of gold displayed naturally. You want to know what brings me here?
Hey, you listeners out there in Radio Land. You're listening to the Voice of Reason podcast. Well, not podcast, Voice of Reason radio show here on the Logos Radio Networks. I should mention this is the official radio show of the Libertarian Party of Texas. If you're interested in supporting the Libertarian Party of Texas, go to lptexas.org and tickle that donate button. We sure could use it going into convention season. We'll be talking with candidates over the next couple of weeks and months. We'll be talking about our conventions and why the Texas Convention is going to be the biggest convention in the state of Texas. Well, the biggest libertarian convention across the country. I think we have an opportunity to beat the national convention. And we're definitely going to be talking about that in the next weeks and months. But today we're talking to Steve Basil about the ride-sharing situation going on in Austin. For those of you who are unaware, City Council voted some weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago at this point, to start throwing more regulations at companies like Uber and Lyft, and a large contingent of business owners and private citizens and even cab companies took up arms, not arms. I would maybe in the future. What they did is they launched a campaign, took up pens, which are mightier than swords sometimes, and that is what is currently going on. So we looked into the politics of it to see. Excuse me, I got a cough. We looked into the politics, looked into where the money is coming from, and it looks like City Council member Ann Kitchen. There's bound to be a joke there that I just can't come up with. But Ann Kitchen was given, it looks like $4,000 from a cab monopoly in the days leading up to her very tight election. She only won with 54% of the vote and avoided a runoff contest. Steve, I wonder if you think that the money has anything to do with this.
Well, there's a Latin phrase, cui bono, who benefits. And when you look at regulations for the sake of regulation, the benefit clearly is not to the citizens of Austin. It's clearly not to the drivers who are employed by these companies like Uber and Lyft. The benefit is the preservation of the status quo. And if the status quo were adequate, that might not be as onerous as it is here, but the status quo isn't adequate. It's grossly inadequate. We have an abysmal level of taxi service. So when the city proposes legislation that increases the regulation on companies that are performing at a very high level on their own, you have to ask, does the money make a difference? I think it's logical to assume that it makes some difference. It certainly is on the minds of a congressperson, a council person who is elected but narrowly, and perhaps was able to run some more ads, hang some more doorknob posters, and win out in the first 10-member election that we have had for our council.
Now, the main thing that I heard when I went canvassing with Uber and Lyft was the fingerprints. And why are Uber and Lyft so hung up on the fingerprints? Why won't they just do the fingerprints? But you do background checks on your employees, don't you? What's your experience with that? Do you need to do fingerprints?
Employment background checks are available at an inexpensive rate through verified services that are subject to Fair Credit reporting requirements and provide an exhaustive look at not only the national and state sex offender registry, but also criminal records in all 50 states and Social Security verification and matching to addresses. So this ensures that somebody isn't using a Social Security number that belongs to a person who died as an infant. It eliminates the possibility of identity theft or identity fraud. It gives a business owner a look at whether or not there is a criminal background on that individual, and if so, what sort. Shoplifting at age 15, not so much of an issue. Felonious assault, much more of an issue. That does not require fingerprinting, and that's similar, it is my understanding, to what Uber and Lyft do. A comprehensive multi-state background check that includes personal visits to the local court jurisdiction where the individual is going to be employed. Fingerprinting has been held up as if it's some sort of panacea. A statewide fingerprint check is not only inadequate, it's kind of inherently discriminatory, because someone who has fingerprints, that may reflect an arrest that never resulted in a conviction. An arrest that never results in a conviction is more likely to be on record if the person is poor or unable to spend time going back to court to have a record expunged for an arrest that never resulted in a conviction. So fingerprinting is inherently discriminatory. It's not effective. It does nothing to ensure safety, and it's a pale substitute for the comprehensive background checks that are readily available and done already by Uber and Lyft.
And yet this is the system that is being presented by members of the Austin City Council saying this is what's going to make us safer.
Yeah, in fact, worse than waving it as a panacea, they're saying, oh, we're making it voluntary. The thumbs up badge saying I have agreed to be fingerprinted, as silly as that is not voluntary in any way other than George Orwell speak. It's voluntary if you never want to pick up a fare downtown. It's voluntary if you never want to pick up a fare at ACL Fest or Eeyores or Formula One or the Austin 360 Amphitheater. It's voluntary if you never want to pick up a fare where fares are available to be picked up. So even though the mayor is calling it voluntary, it's absolutely mandatory if you want to do business as an Uber or Lyft driver.
And don't you have to be fingerprinted in order to get a driver's license in this state?
There's a thumbprint required, and you know, you raise an important point. They're talking about duplication of regulation. The city proposed a second vehicle inspection. My vehicle's inspected every year. They finally went to a single sticker where you don't have to go for a separate emissions inspection and then a registration sticker. When I get registered, I verify that my car has been inspected and it met a standard safety regulation. Everyone's car has that sticker on it. There's no reason in the world that someone who is an Uber or Lyft driver should have to go to another place with limited access, limited hours, on their own time, pay for an additional fee to be re-inspected because they happen to carry passengers. Same with the requirement to carry a fire extinguisher in a car. It's just silly. If the car is on fire, I suggest you run away from it. Having a fire extinguisher in a car is not really a great thing. If you stay around looking for the fire extinguisher, chances are you're going to get burned.
Sure. I guess if you want to have a fire extinguisher in your car, by all means do that. But perhaps it's not the pinnacle of safety in that situation.
Yeah, making it a requirement just seems really superfluous. So duplicating requirements. I'm already licensed as a driver. My car is already inspected according to a state program. Its emissions are inspected according to a state program. All of those things, and I'm driving with insurance. If I want to become an Uber driver and I pass their comprehensive background check, why introduce additional regulations to make it harder for me to do that?
I should point out that Austin is not the first city that this has happened in. This has happened all across Texas. San Antonio, to my knowledge, was the most recent, and this happened about a year ago. And Uber and Lyft, Nick, do you know more about the situation in San Antonio?
Yes, and they opted for a voluntary, a so-called voluntary fingerprinting, and you get a stamp on your thing. And it's really, it hasn't had more effect than an acclaim from authority. So instead of the rating system, which the trust between you and the drivers is crowdsourced, it's that the government has checked them out and that the government says that they're okay and it's safe for you to get in the car, which we already know there's a consistent record of that being false.
Sure. Yeah. I really, in the Libertarian Party, I would say all the regulations that you mentioned would be regulations that we would probably be against to begin with. But duplicating those regulations is absolutely ridiculous. That's two completely different departments of government that have to be created to do the exact same things.
And it seems like when we talk about the proper role of government, especially from the libertarian platform, although it includes, the protecting and securing the rights of people, I think that it's really dangerous ground to get into protecting people from themselves. And it looks like that's what we're doing when we're trying to take away people's ability to use their own discernment and look at whether or not somebody has 5 stars or somebody has 3 stars. In fact, I don't even think you can drive for Uber or Lyft if you have less than 4.6 or something. It's very small margins. But it seems like people don't want to think. They want to just trust that the government's put a stamp on it and I'm going to be okay. Slap a kid in the car. But
sure, and that to me is the most dangerous thing about our modern society is the abdication of responsibility. To say that I am a free person, but I abdicate my responsibility to take care of myself to an entity that ultimately has no stake in how healthy you are. They don't care. That's not what they're designed to do, and they're really bad at doing it. So understanding that taking your personal responsibility for your own safety is absolutely tantamount to being an adult in this society.
Steve, do you think it's adequate?
Before you ask another question there, we are about to go into another break, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that we are listening to the Voice of Reason radio show here on the Logos Radio Networks. To visit, go to logosradionetwork.com. You can check out our archives there. This is our, second or third show. We're just trucking right along. It is the official radio show of the Libertarian Party of Texas. To visit LP Texas, go to lptexas.org. We'll be back with Steve Basil after this break.
If you were hiding from the law, would you answer an ad promising a free TV to anyone who tested home electronic equipment? Some Chicago crooks did, and police gave them quite a prize. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with details after this.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Con artists love scamming people with bogus offers, but in Chicago, police turned the tables and reeled in dozens of arrests. Police mailed invitations to the last known addresses of 10,000 violent felons, drug dealers, and burglars, offering $75 and a free plasma TV to anyone who came down to a warehouse to test out TVs and video games. Inside the warehouse, decorated with party balloons and posters, officers in bright T-shirts had those gullible fugitives pose for pictures before arresting them. 102 in all. I'd say even Paul Newman would have gotten a chuckle out of that sting. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at logosradionetwork.com.
Welcome back to the Voice of Reason radio show here on the Logos Radio Networks. We're talking with Steve Basil today. He is a downtown bar owner, a businessman, and he is in here talking to us about the ride-sharing situation in Austin. For those of you who don't know, a few months ago, Austin City Council voted to start putting more regulations on ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft. And Steve, I wonder, because you are a business owner, and you have to have government licensing to run a bar and a restaurant. But I wonder, now that there's new crowdsourcing technology that's out there, have you seen a more free, a more voluntarist way of that your clients look at in order to choose your bar to come to?
That's a great question, Ben. We, as a business, of course, food and beverage, we have a license to sell food. We have a alcohol license from TABC, the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, that allows us to sell beer, wine, and liquor. And the number of businesses with those two licenses, the number of bars and restaurants in any municipality is vast. If you were just looking to find a bar, you could look at a listing of everyone with a TABC license. But if you're looking to find a good pub, if you're looking to find a good plate of fish and chips, apps like Yelp and Zagat and Urban Spoon, now Zomato, TripAdvisor, give people the ability to look for a particular type of business and find out what others think. So if you're looking for an Irish pub downtown, you can search on Yelp and say, hey, this place, B.D. Riley's, happens to have 275 reviews and a 4-star average. You can read what other people say about it. You can find out if the fish and chips is good. You can find out if they pour a good pint of Guinness. And you can not take my word for it, but take the word of many, many people who've come to visit and been kind enough to share their reviews. That's really very analogous to the Uber and Lyft situation. I know when I see my driver what their rating is. I know when I complete my ride that I can give my driver a rating that's shared with other people. That is sort of a self-leveling playing field. It means that we're all in this to do the absolute best that we can, and our ratings reflect that. You know what? I haven't advertised in 7 years. We work exclusively on word of mouth. We're fortunate to have been here for 15 years, and we can rely on our reputation. But we're only as good as our reputation. That license on the wall is an absolute baseline. Everybody's got that.
What a concept. Reputation being the driving force behind reputation instead of a government license. In fact, we talk about this all the time, especially with your more online companies, Amazon, eBay. They really do have anarchic forms of developing reputation. If you do business with a guy on eBay and he simply doesn't send you the weird movie or the weird animation movie that you ordered, then you get on eBay and you blast that guy. And the next guy who does business with him, he might read it and go, maybe it was just a bad case. I'll give him a shot. And if he doesn't send that guy his weird Japanese thing, then he'll get on there and blast him. And eventually, this guy has created a reputation for himself that simply nobody wants to do business with him. This is voluntarist theory in absolute action. It works. The theory that ostracization works better than jailing people. It works better than throwing more licensing at people. The idea that a customer can decide for themselves whether or not to do business with an entity is empowering. It's real time, and it works.
Especially now that we have the technology to be able to decentralize this. I mean, in a village of 20 people, your reputation is everything. But in a city of millions of people, that becomes more difficult because people don't have the personal knowledge and relationship to be able to make those decisions. So I can see why it would be so easy to lean toward government regulation to solve all problems. But in the 21st century, where we have Yelp and tools, thousands of tools like that, where you can participate in ethical consumerism and look at the social corporate social responsibility ratings and all other ratings of companies, people can just start to decide for themselves again. And I think that that's really more of a libertarian approach to it, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it goes far deeper than simply how we do business. I think it actually goes to the depth of how do we organize our society. And with technologies like we have today, there really is becoming less and less of a reason to have a ruling elite making a bunch of decisions for us. 200 years ago, one of the reasons, there were lots, but one of the reasons that the founding fathers came up with a republic for us to have we wanted a republic, was because not everyone could have been in Philadelphia for the big vote. Not every voter could be in Philadelphia. So the idea is you elect a guy and you send him up there, and then he's going to vote the way you want him to vote. But all of us are looking and holding these little devices in our hands now. We could all be in Philadelphia for the big vote now. And these ride-sharing programs and these anarchic systems online, these reputation programs, this to me is the future of how our species is going to organize ourselves. And what we're seeing now is kind of the last throes of the ruling elite saying, no, we're going to use regulation to prevent the next evolution of the species from happening.
Well, reviews and crowdsourced opinion sharing have another effect. If I'm looking to succeed, I happen to run a business that's surrounded by 50 other similar businesses, at least ostensibly on the surface. They're all bars and or restaurants in the area of 6th Street where I've chosen to hang out a sign. If the guy next door has a 5-star average and I've got a 2-star average, I'd better up my game. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the other unintended consequences of reliable ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft is that the existing taxi monopoly has to up its game as well. They have to become more responsive. They have to become more reliable. You're seeing it in the form of applications that are being issued by taxi companies. In San Francisco, there's a hailing app that is something similar to what Uber and Lyft have actually perfected. So that opinion sharing means everyone can see how I'm doing, and I better raise the bar. If I don't, then
you go out of business.
The market speaks.
There's another thing that happens when you introduce competition into any system. Prices go down for the consumer. Prices go down. Services go up. This is the power of competition. And this is why the Libertarian Party and libertarianism believes in free market capitalism. Not crony capitalism. Not the one that we have currently, the ones where the government is picking winners and losers. Actual market capitalism. And for the exact reasons that Steve mentioned, if somebody has a better product than me, I have two options: up my game or drop my profit margins to a point where I might not be able to sustain myself, and eventually won't be able to sustain myself. So a smart business owner, and not even a smart one, just a business owner who doesn't want to starve to death, will figure out a way to work harder and increase profit margins while decreasing cost to client.
And let me give you a little tip here, too. And by the way, we need to make it clear that this isn't Uber and Lyft versus the taxis. This is government-enforced monopolies versus the free market. And this is, are we going to let one competitor in the market use the local political systems in order to gain a competitive edge over another one, when we already have the preference for a service that has been less regulated? I mean, it's right there. But I wanted to I'm sorry, Ben, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is a principle that seems to be across the board so far. When you look at things like our healthcare system, there are two types of procedures that you can get that haven't been regulated by government for the last 10 years. And those are like LASIK eye surgery and cosmetic surgeries. They weren't covered under Medicare and Medicaid unless just really, really, really specific situations. And you know what's happened? The technology has dramatically improved and the cost has dramatically reduced because the government wasn't in that market picking winners and losers. This is the cost of competition. This is the benefit of competition.
That's right. And here's a tip. If you don't like the surge prices of Uber and Lyft that they do during peak hours, call a cab.
Well, or try to.
That's the free market. Or try to. That's right.
Yeah, I think, another point I've heard, I think generally from someone who doesn't really understand the issue is, well, taxi drivers already have to get fingerprinted, so why shouldn't Uber and Lyft drivers?
The fairness. The
perpetuation of a bad regulation because they've always done it that way isn't a really good way to do business. It would be better to look at what is a safe, reliable, and effective way of determining driver credentials and driver suitability so that all companies, whether they have a yellow cab or a pedicab or an Uber or Lyft, have drivers who are safe, reliable, and known to the company and to the passenger. So saying we've always done fingerprinting for cabbies and we've always done fingerprinting for pedicabs, why won't Uber and Lyft just suck it up and do it? Well, you're saying why don't we perpetuate the wrong way of doing things because we've always done it the wrong way?
We're talking to Steve Basil, and we're about to go to break, but we'll come right back. You're listening to the Voice of Reason radio show.
Easy.
Hey, all you schmohawks out there. Welcome back to the Voice of Reason radio show, the official radio show of the Libertarian Party of Texas. Today, we're dealing with the issue of regulation, and we're viewing it through the lens of the current ride-sharing government regulation situation going on in Austin. where Austin City Council has said they want to put extra regulations onto Uber and Lyft, and they want to do it out of safety. Although, it's funny that the people who touted for this regulation on the City Council, they got some money from the taxi monopolies in the days leading up to their election. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it, though. Nothing at all. They are really just concerned about your safety. And so the regulations that they've said that they are supporting, we've gone over them today, and they all make us so much safer. And, of course, they don't. They don't make us any safer. It's just creating more government red tape to pick through, and also more government revenue to go into the hands of their cronies. We're talking with Steve Basil. He is a downtown bar owner, and he's talking to us about why ride sharing has affected his business in a very positive way.
I think it's clear from the past year and a half of relatively unfettered access to TNCs that ride sharing works. It improves access to transportation downtown. It provides a safe, reliable alternative for people who have decided not to drive home when they might have had a beer or too many. It takes some cars off the road in the case of people who don't want to drive downtown and don't want to deal with congested parking. And I think very clearly, as the sheriff recently posted, it's had an effect on DWI arrests and fatalities. After many, many years of increasing, despite increased DUI enforcement, despite enforcing a national drinking age of 21, drunk driving fatalities and DWI arrests climbed. In the past year and a half, now it's a small curve, but in the past year and a half, they've gone down. Chief of Police Acevedo said that we can't necessarily determine cause and effect, but it certainly appears to be correlated. The sheriff of Travis County said the same thing. We have an opportunity to reduce DWI fatalities, to reduce DUI arrests, to give people a choice when they want to drive home, or when they would have had to drive home if they didn't have an alternative. And I think if safety is your real issue, that's a critical one. We're talking about fatalities here. The other aspect of safety is this sort of anecdotal thing. Well, I heard that there was an assault by an Uber driver in Mumbai. Well, the plural of anecdotes isn't data. I've gotten into many, many cabs. I have no idea who the cab driver is. I have no idea if their license is valid. I have no idea if they're a driver of good reputation or not. And I kind of take my chances because their cab is yellow. When I get into an Uber driver's car, I know that driver has passed a background check. I know their name, I know their license number, and I know their rating. I also can send my ride to friends. I can automatically share that ride data with someone else. I can list an emergency contact. If I'm a woman traveling alone, I might do that and say, hey, Bill, I'm on my way to you here, or a man driving alone. I'm on my way. Here's my Uber route. That's a capability that simply doesn't exist with taxis. So if you're talking about safety, Uber and Lyft have it in spades, and keeping drunk drivers off the road is one additional benefit.
Nick, I wonder if you think this is a symptom of a larger solution, as in the technology revolution that we're undergoing is now solving a lot of these problems that government had kind of but poorly solved in the past.
We have a situation right here where in the last 17 months, since ride-sharing, Uber and Lyft have been here in Austin, DWI collisions have been down like 18%. That's the statistic that I heard. That is solving a problem through the free market, a free market solution without government. Now, this is an expression of something that is really fundamentally important to our cultural and historical context today, if you ask me. And that is because we have now more laws than the laws of physics, and we have red-taped ourselves into a corner with licenses and fees and taxes from everything from being born to catching a fish. And if we continue in this direction, people are going to subjugate away their ability to use their own discernment and think for themselves. And you know what the problem with that is? Because the creative capacity of human beings to dive to the depths of the sea without holding their breath, and to alter genetic codes, and to create universes and virtual reality and all the stuff that we can do without the ability for people to know what's right and wrong and think for themselves, when people are just tuning their moral compass to whatever the authorities say is the law or should be done, is a dangerous, dangerous thing, where the creative capacity can be harnessed without the limitations of a moral conscience.
What's the fun line about licensing? Is that a government license is when they take away a freedom from you and sell it back?
Yes.
That's precisely what we're seeing. But because of technology, we're able to start kind of overcoming these things. This is being more and more exposed. Now, this is a small example, this ride-sharing situation. But right now, we have regulation across the board. And I think all of us agree. Now, follow me. Stay with me on this. We all agree that a form of regulation does need to exist. We simply don't think that government is the proper entity to levy that regulation. We think that the human being who is making that decision is the best arbiter of their own circumstances, the best person to decide which company they would prefer to deal with. Maybe they don't have all the information about a company. Hey, it might come out that Uber employs slave labor in Canada or something. And we don't know that right now. But if that ever came up, that would also be something that someone could make the decision off of. The concept is that you are the sole proprietor of your own person. You own yourself, and nobody should be dictating to you what you can and can't do with your own self, with your own body, and with your own property.
And you shouldn't be telling other people. And you should start to think for yourself, because right now, the whole top-down way of doing things is going to come to a head. We're going to vote ourselves into a dictator if we continue in this direction. People, if you don't like Uber and Lyft, use a taxi. If you don't like Lyft and you like Uber, use Uber. You do it like that. But when you start to use our local political systems to gain to give an advantage to one in the market over another, without voting by your dollars, without using boycotting and things that are in your hands, then you're creating for yourself something that is a grave opportunity for abuse.
Yeah, I spent a lot of years as an activist for marriage equality and was happy to see laws banning same-sex marriage struck down by a Supreme Court decision in Obergefell. The response that I had all the time when someone says, well, I don't believe two guys should be able to get married, I don't like the idea of same-sex marriage, my answer was always, then don't have one.
Right,
exactly. My mom and dad were married 59 years, and when the Supreme Court passed or handed down the Obergefell decision, my dad called and said, my marriage feels so threatened right now. Dad, always a wise guy. In truth, he said, the thing that threatens my marriage are TV shows like The Bachelor. But the answer is, let the individual decide. And I've made a decision since the very first Uber ride I took that it is far and away the best decision for me. I have a good friend who's a few years older than I, and she's a woman who travels in a taxi by herself periodically. And she has said she thinks that she feels safer in a taxi cab. And even though I've explained reasons why that is not necessarily borne out by facts or evidence, she said that's just me. And you know what? That's fine. Hail a cab. And she's someone who's not typically out at 2:00 in the morning or trying to leave ERs with 1,000 other people. But if I make a choice to choose a transportation mechanism that I find to be safe, reliable, and predictable, and also gives me a cashless transaction, a record of my receipt, and allows me to share rating information on that driver. To me, I'm building a universe of information about a ride-sharing service that everyone gets to benefit from.
That's exactly right. And you simply don't get that sort of information from the taxi companies. You just don't get it. And even if that's how they change their business model to where that's the kind of information you do get from them, fine. But the decision needs to be with you, the individual. That's what we hold precious in the Libertarian Party and in the entire liberty movement is power to the people. Power to the person is more important than anything else, I think.
And for parents too. Parents, if you think about it, is your goal to raise a child who's going to be eternally dependent on you to know right from wrong and make decisions for themselves and think for themselves? No, your goal is to raise children who are going to grow up and become their own mom and dad and be able to think for themselves and maybe raise a child of their own one day. It's the same. If we keep trying to go through this top-down way of organizing ourselves and relating to each other in society, we're never going to create that. It's not very becoming, and it's not healthy direction to go in our society, where we don't want to think for ourselves. We want to have a government who tells us, or at least tells the minority in the vote, the way that they should be doing things and thinking.
It's not good for our innovation or invention capabilities too. Just as a species, we have this really incredible ability in this weird human species to come up with solutions to problems. We have this really cool ability to do that. And when a top-down government official says, this is the solution to your problem, well, innovation stops.
Well, and that, if there was an alternative, if there was something proposed that would fill this void in transportation options, it might be easier to deal with the fact that the council and the mayor have made a bad decision. But there isn't. There's no backup plan. If Uber and Lyft decide that this sort of onerous regulation is insufficient for them to do business in this city, the 11th most populous city in the United States, they'll just say, so long. And the mayor and the council then have to answer to the cops and the sheriff, who are now pointing to an increase in DUI arrests and an increase in DWI fatalities. There is no backup. We don't have light rail. We don't have transportation options. We don't have enough taxis. If you say we're going to regulate Uber and Lyft out of Austin, you have created a vacuum into which you have nothing to put.
That is the last word for today. I want to thank Steve Basil for coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Yes,
we'll definitely
happy to be here.
We'll definitely have you back on when we're talking about the Texas Blue Laws, because I think you might be a good person to talk to about that. I want to mention that this is the official radio show of the Libertarian Party of Texas. Please go to lptexas.org and get involved. Figure out what's going on in your county, in your precinct area. And the state convention is coming up April 8th through 10th in lovely San Antonio, Texas. To buy your tickets to that, go to libertynow.org. You're listening to the Voice of Reason radio show. I've been Ben Farmer, and I'll be Ben Farmer next Saturday.